it's a distinctive interpretation of the founding. It occurs during the Depression. It occurs at the 150th anniversary of the signing, at a time when America is in crisis and one wonders who we are and where we're going. No better time than the time of crisis, it seems to me, to reflect on one's roots and to recreate or reconnect with who we are. And this was commissioned, this is the second version of what was commissioned to celebrate the 1937 sesquicentennial of the signing of the Constitution, and as I say, hangs in founding. One of the things I managed to do is that you got this pop-up stuff, and you can go around and you don't even have to click on. It'll tell you exactly which delegate is the person in mind. And that sort of, for those people who have a difficulty getting into the actual Madison's Republic text, this sometimes is an encouragement. Most high school students and middle school students love this method. And from the time they can see that they don't have to guess who is who, they start to get more interested in, well, what, you always go there, right, George Washington, and you click on Washington, and what happens is then you click on Learn More, and as you click on Learn More, it's Learn More. No, here, Learn More, right there. Right. There you go. You're getting it. What comes up is a complete biography of Washington and what he did at the convention and what he was important for, and it raises a number of questions. So what you could do is to follow Washington, for example, through the convention and test a thesis. Washington played no role. That's a thesis. Well, did he? Once you start focusing, Madison's notes, Madison's Republic is so good that if you pursue an issue, a person, through his notes, you can reconstruct, not every single move they made, but you can reconstruct the role that they played at the convention. So that if you are artistically inclined or pictorially inclined and get attached to the idea of how an artist puts things together, and you get interested in Washington, click. You can then, by way of following Washington, pursue the project that I have in mind, which is to get you to Madison's notes. If we go back to the Christie painting, please. Going back, there we are. Now there are all kinds of angles or side roads that we could take through the Christie painting. And it could take us the entire 40 minutes or so that I want to devote to this. But I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is to suggest that what Christie, I'm going to suggest a couple of points to try to encourage those of you who are so inclined to go further. It is at least fairly clear to me, and you know, when you start interpreting interpretations, it becomes sort of tricky. But it becomes fairly clear to me that one of the notions that Christie wants to get across is that there are at least three delegates who are more important than the others. And he has isolated those three in the front. And you can see them in the front there. If you go to the front, you can see Franklin in the middle. Come down. Just to the immediate right of Franklin. The immediate right, well, the immediate left of Franklin, James Madison, and then there's Hamilton. So those are the great three. That is Christie's interpretation. And so one of the things I invite you to do is the next time you get to Madison's notes, which I hope you go back as often as many political theorists go back to Plato's Republic, and see something different the next time they go through it. I would encourage you to test, in other words, Christie's interpretation, that these are the three big, or is Christie actually not just interpreting the convention, but interpreting through the convention an American story or an American narrative in which, because when you start looking at the actual details of the convention, Hamilton and Franklin are not cutting-edge people, at least if you take Madison's text to be an accurate reconstruction of it. Madison, of course, is critical in Madison's text, and as so he should be because Socrates is critical in Plato's Republic, and that doesn't bother me. But at least Madison, the author, unlike Plato, the author, shows where Madison failed. Plato doesn't show where Socrates failed. He becomes king. The second point I want to encourage you to take a look at is the curtains and the sun coming in the windows. One of the great controversies that has followed through the convention is the so-called secrecy rule. And it's the curtains were drawn, and there are two interpretations. One, all about it is shafty, my dear. We keep it in secret. That's the sort of the notion of democracy as transparency, which has fueled the progressive movement and progressive historians. That if the founders really wanted to do something of an open nature, they would have kept everything open. The press would have been there, etc. But they went into secret. And only when they accomplished their task on the day of the signing did they open the windows. The sun shone in, the halo was over Washington, ha ha ha. And that becomes fodder for the progressive interpretation of sort of the windows. What happens within the closing of the drawing of the drapes, and the whole image which that conjures up. By the way, the only person of the framing generation who really opposed this closing of the windows and the secrecy rule was Jefferson. And he wasn't there. Madison gave perhaps the best answer. And that best answer is that, and I'm paraphrasing him, is conversations just don't happen. If you want civil discourse, you've got to be able to build an infrastructure for civil discourse. And that infrastructure requires certain rules of civility, or building teamwork without building groupthink at the same time. And that's what the convention managed, it seems to me, to secure. A huge task. How can you get a team together? Deans know how difficult it is. Vice presidents know how difficult it is. Without at the same time running the risk of, yes sir, yes sir. And I think the founders managed to do that over a 4-month period. And so one of Madison's rules is you got to be able to learn to trust each other. If you don't trust each other, you won't say what's on your mind. Don't say what's on your mind, we will not make progress. And when it comes to the time to test this, we can go to the people through ratification. So this notion of secrecy is not a permanent secrecy rule. It's, I would interpret it as one of those methods by means of which conversation is encouraged. And it's interesting to see those texts that do have versions of Madison's notes. All the edited versions that I've looked at cut out the first 3 or 4 days, and as if they were not an important part. That is laying down the rules. Nobody should speak twice. You shan't fall asleep when someone else is talking. You won't have a side conversation and write scribble notes to the person. You'll pay attention. Nobody will be noticed twice unless everybody's had the chance to be noticed once. I mean, you say, oh God, get on with it. But you think about that. Those are supports or pillars that are extremely important in conversation. And I will mention one last thing about the Christie painting. If you go over to these 3 people with their hands up, as if saying, "Heil Washington." By the way, one of the ways Americans used to greet each other was to go like that until Hitler ruined the whole darn thing. We didn't used to shake hands. It was anyway. These 3 people are from South Carolina. They're together in their own delegation, as are, by the way, these 2 grumpy-looking people sitting around a chair, Sherman and Johnson from Connecticut, the only people around a table. And the only people with all kinds of crumpled paper on the floor, as if they lost over against the 3 people in the front who, ha ha ha, we won. One way to read the convention is, if you were an artist, how would you depict the Constitutional Convention pictorially or artistically? I think, as one of the theses, is that the Connecticut delegation was far more important in securing this more perfect union than that painting gives credit for. It looks like, again, interpreting an interpretation, this painting seems to portray 2 people around a table with crumpled paper, not accomplishing something, with these 3 in front with Franklin and his stick and his almanac and whatever else, with Hamilton whispering to him. I have no idea what they were talking about or what he could possibly be whispering to Franklin. But if you take a look at that's the South Carolina delegation together with Ohio. If you go behind that second hand, you go behind the second hand, yeah, that one, just come, I don't know whether to tell you to go to your left or your right, but go to the guy's left. You've gone too far. This time you've gone too far. You've gone still too far. Here you go, that's him. Pierce Butler. If you click on Pierce Butler, you'll see that his face is still covered. And the reason for that is that Christie is being authentic. There is no official portrait of Pierce Butler. And so he's covered his face. Once I recognize that, I'm starting to take Christie far more seriously than I did before. Oh, just a painting. No, this is an avenue along one of those many roads that 10 roads that we can take. Because Christie is being very cautious, being very attempting at the same time, well, he's doing two things. One, he's taking artistic license, which is what interpretation is, over against being authentic, trying to reproduce and accurate. If we click on Learn More, there you go. There is an official portrait. But if I had a portrait like that, I would like a hand over my face too. So that's just the unofficial portrait. All right, if we go back, so that's one way, the Christie way, using Christie as our vehicle or our road to the Madison stones. A second way, if we go back to the main page, you'll see, and you scroll down, visual interpretations of the content. This would be what I would call a comparative pictorial way. And there, I've put together, I think there are 10, I managed to discover 10 different interpretations, pictorial interpretations of the founding. And each one has its own distinctive flavor from the 1860s all the way through to the 1980s. And so if once you are interested, if at first you're interested in the Christie method, then maybe you will go to the second one, which is a comparativist method. I'll give you two examples from this comparative method. If you go to, you scroll down and you take the Barry Faulkner, the one that's ahead of that Barry Faulkner. Now that's probably the one that most people see. At least this is the one that teachers think most students should see if you take a look at the lines outside the National Archives. This is Barry Faulkner's rendition. And if you go into the National Archives, on the left-hand side is his version of the Declaration of Independence. On the right-hand side is his version of the Constitution. And in the middle are the precious documents. Okay? And this is Faulkner's rendition. Now look how different that is from Christie's interpretation. And they're outside, not inside. There are no windows. And these pillars, and everybody's dressed like Romans or Greeks or who knows, a combination. And there's Washington in the middle with Madison to his right, to his right. Yeah, and one more to his right. One, yeah, you're not far right enough. And they're the father of the Constitution with a copy of the Constitution, turning it over to the father of the country. See, the father, etc. I have no idea why Alexander Hamilton is knocking the wooden leg of Gouverneur Morris as if he's sort of tripping and hockey, you know. Just I don't know why. I have no idea what's going on, but we do know that Gouverneur Morris had a wooden leg. And in this picture, it is his left. But if you click on Gouverneur Morris for a moment, and I've got a story about him, and you scroll down, you'll see it's his right leg. In this official. Well, I don't know whether there's something going on. We should never overlook something that seems odd. It may lead to a dead end, but on the other hand, it may lead to something that's important. Yet Gouverneur Morris was supposed to have said that he lost his leg in an amorous affair. And one of his friends responded that, this may teach you a lesson. Behave yourself. And he wrote back and said, well, such is the lesson you've given me and the beauty of it, that maybe I should have the other one amputated while I'm at it. There's some humor to the founders too, you should notice. If you go back to the point is, not all 30. See, interesting. Christie has 39 people because 39 signed, and he has William Jackson, the recorder. But he doesn't have the 3 who don't sign. Faulkner doesn't have 39, but he does have the 3 who don't sign. This is a different interpretation of the convention. And one can there say, who was he left out, who was he put in? And by the way, it's done virtually at the same time that Christie's painting was done, in the 1930s. And it was commissioned by the person who put together the Jefferson Memorial, known as the last classicist. And a lot of this notion of the word demigods can be attributed to this Faulkner rendition. If you go back to the comparative list, at the end of the last one, Glassman. That's the one that hangs at Independence Hall. If those of you get a chance to go to Philadelphia and get your ticket, go to Independence Hall. The Glassman painting is the one that hangs. What is beautiful about the Glassman painting is that it probably reproduces in its most original, authentic form the coloring scheme of the convention. And it also accurately portrays where Madison is. You can see Madison next to Washington there. Yeah, you go up. There you go. That's James Madison of Virginia. And in his notes, Madison says, I took a position to the left of Washington where I could see everybody in action and I could take all my notes, etc. So Glassman is the only one who is accurate with regard to that rendition of the location of Madison in his entire story. You will notice that the person who is signing is Jacob, the person who's signing, at the desk in front of Washington. No, at the desk in front of Washington. Okay. There you go, right there, is Jacob Broom. There is no known official representation of Jacob Broom. And so the way in which Glassman has reproduced Broom's presence is by having him sign with his back to you. Again, once you understand something like that is taking place, at least with me, what happens is that there is a whole jump in appreciation for the care taken in trying to portray to the next generation what was going on. The one thing that is totally absent from the Glassman painting is windows. And so that whole thesis has disappeared, in a sense, from Glassman's rendition, as if it were irrelevant to the discussion and what takes place at the convention. Right, let's go back to the original homepage. So that's second. I think there are a whole bunch of things you can see. Even if you don't write, what I've done is, if you click on the delegate, you can find out the biography still in there, but I haven't gone through that. All right, so that's the second way, a comparative. The third way is this interactive map of historical Philadelphia. And I put this together, but I'm not going to do this because, in fact, I'm going to walk you through historic Philadelphia, some of you anyway, on Saturday morning. I will say that I can get very technical about this. You see that dot right there? That's where Gouverneur Morris lost his leg. And you got to be really interested in this stuff like me to figure out where did he lose his leg, right? If you click on that, the dot, they're just by Logan's Alley, which is right near City Tavern. How lucky he could go in and have a drink while his leg was being off. The arrow there on Dock Street, yeah, you go to Morris's accident. That's his right leg. You come down, and that's the spot, right there. And there are all kinds of stories. What's that?
I stood on that spot.
See, and you didn't know how important it was. Now, because of that, you will go to the convention. You will go to Madison's notes. Just because of that. Now you want to find out more about Gouverneur Morris. No. Yeah. There are other things that I will mention during the tour. But why that? Well, there's a very interesting restatement in theories of education that it's known as on-site learning. And if you can't bring Philadelphia to the teachers, you take teachers to Philadelphia. It's part of the National Endowment for the Humanities. I don't know what they exactly call it, on-site or you're there or something or the other.
Landmarks of American
There you
history.
go, landmarks of American history. And so they take teachers to Mount Vernon for a week, or they take, like this, the the Presidential Academy one, where you have one teacher from each state. They bring them to Philadelphia for a week, then to Gettysburg, then to Washington, D.C. So somehow there's this concept of learning which says if you are there at the spot where something occurred, even though it was 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or even, in this theory, even if you go to Athens and go where Socrates stood, wow, it's going to rub off on you. So there's this notion of the contextual understanding of learning. So that by the way, goes over extremely well with high school teachers. The Christie painting goes over very well with high school students. This contextual one is the way in which teachers like to pursue. That's the third. The fourth one, if we go back to the beginning, is some people are just downright biographical. And if we go up, scroll up a bit, no, yes, scroll up, that too far. Back down again. Names, ages, education, experience, and biographies of the delegates. Keep scrolling. That's a story from. Right. We get this impression. They're old men. The question of the age. I don't know what about their education, the continental experience, etc. If you just take a look at the age of the framers, just as a way of getting into this, just click that. And this shows you, look at the number of people in their 20s. Dayton, Mercer, Spate, and Pinckney. Not exactly household names, but there were 4 of them in their 20s. Look at the movers and shakers. They were the people who were in their 30s. And including in that list as Rufus King, Gouverneur Morris, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. If this is what's going to get you interested, and then if you click James Madison, yeah, you go, you got him, you click him, then I can give you a biography of him. And so once you're in through the biography, maybe then that will lead you into these other side roads. So it's not exactly a young man's convention, excuse me, an old man's convention. So it's a young person's convention. What changed? So if you now to reread Madison's notes, by looking at age as a variable in terms of what happens, who does what, the composition of committees, etc. I could go through, well, let's just do education. You go back there, the next one is educational background. You can notice, if you come down through the educational background, Harvard, Yale, and there's Princeton. Now there's a place that if you take a look at that, I'm not going to say that this is exactly true, that these folks, when they were in college, formed long-lasting relationships. That's what admissions people do these days in college, to get you to come to college. You will form long-lasting relationships until you get a divorce. But these, no, I shouldn't do that. Shouldn't do that. No, you're a guest. No. But notice New Jersey. Notice what happens here is that these people knew each other, and these colleges were not simply locations for in-state residents. A place like Princeton, New Jersey, attracted out-of-state people, and some of you may be from out-of-state Pennsylvania, Vermont. You can tell what happens is that as you move from one, even today, so you can imagine it then, when the connections were even greater, that when you move from one state to another state, you start being introduced to a continental view of things, or an interstate view of things. And Princeton was sort of at the core of that. So they didn't just simply attract people from New Jersey. It attracted people from out of state, where these folks got to know each other in some fashion or the other. And we could continue with it, but we'll stop at that particular point. So that's number 4. That is the biographical manner in which you can portray their backgrounds and get to know. Perhaps by getting to know them in that sense, you can spill over into Madison's book called the the more perfect union, or the real republic. If we go back to the right, that's 4. If you're really starting to get into the hang of this now, you want to get down and grubby. One way to do it is by going to go up. Let's see, day-by-day summary of the convention. One of the problems in keeping your attention on Madison's Republic, which of course we're inching closer and closer to, is you tend to lose sight of what is going on a day-to-day basis. But if you could remember this, every single conversation, however much it might digress, there's a focus to it, even though they may digress. And the focus is that some proposition, or some resolution, or some amendment to a resolution, or some clause or section is on the table at that particular time. And if you can identify what that clause is on which day, and keep that in mind as you're reading that text during that day, I think that the debates and the nuances of the debate will come alive. And you won't just grasp little aphorisms. For example, John Dickinson is well recognized that in early August, he says, let experience be our guide, reason may mislead us. And that's been taken by historians as somehow the epitome of what went on at the convention. They weren't Platonic, this, that, and the other. Well, of course they were. But does it matter to know, for example, where that conversation, where Dickinson said that, on what day, and what was the context? And I mean, it might, and it might not. But if you are a textualist, which is what I hope you will become, if you're not already with Collier's guidance, that you will see that that occurred during a rather obscure conversation dealing with where money bills should originate. And then you say, well, what the heck does money bills originate, where money bills originate have got to do with anything? And then you pursue money bills. And what you find out is that at the core of the Connecticut Compromise was this glue, which we usually portray the Connecticut Compromise as a popular representation in the House, equal state representation in the Senate. But there was a glue, and it was, and that money bills shall originate in the House. And you think, my goodness, why is that important? And the answer is, it was important to get George Mason's vote in order to go along on the Jerry Committee. And then you say, well, why was that important? Well, he started off as being a great supporter of the Virginia plan. Well, now what? And then once you grasp that little bit of insight, then you follow, well, let me see, when do money bills come in? And then you begin to think, well, wait, George Mason was on that committee, money bills came in, he wanted it, it got passed as part of the Connecticut Compromise, and immediately after, Madison says, let's drop the money bills because it doesn't matter. And what happens? It gets dropped. And in the end, George Mason doesn't sign. Click. Is there a link? Is there a link that George Mason didn't sign because of that? And so the next time you read Madison's Republic, you try to follow the following question. Can I identify when George Mason started peeling away and decided not to sign? And the answer is, yes, you can. And what is the issue? When money bills got dropped. And I come and say, whoa, my goodness, is Madison being that intricate? This is a good book. This is a great book if I can discover that. And then, there are other things that one can discover if you pay attention to the day-by-day slogging. Because out of that day-by-day slogging, sort of gold nuggets start to appear. I've just given you one. There are multiple gold nuggets. All right, I've forgotten how many we're on now. 5 or 6. We've got to keep going. We're on 5.
Yeah.
You can count. All right, let's go back to the. Let's go back to the. Right. For those who now are really get grubby and say, let's take a look at committee assignment chart. The committee assignment chart is that what I put together here is, if you go down. You can see here that there were these committees. That, who got on those committees? When were they on? Who was the chair of the committee? When did it occur at the time of the convention? Were there more committees during the early part or more committees during the later part? Does that matter? yes, you begin to realize that in the months of May and June and July, the convention was mainly about discourse. In August to September, the convention was mainly about action. And the turning point is August the 6th in the convention. So therefore, committee assignments, for August the 6th on, become almost like a privileged position. That is, that what comes out of those committees has a standing of considerable importance because they're given the go-ahead to come up with something. And so you say, does that mean that the convention in August and September was simply a rubber stamp of these committees? No, but what it does mean is that when the convention's delegates say, whoa, you know it's important, or at least that's a clue to something being important. And so as you go through August and September with these committee assignments and who's on these committees and who's representing what is coming out, you stop and say, what issues on these committees do the delegates say, whoa, it's too important to just go through? And one issue is slavery. And why did it take them so long to get around to slavery? Well, you got to follow the flow of the convention in order to understand. You can't get around to slavery until Congress is given the authority to regulate interstate commerce or international commerce. And that does not occur until August the 6th. And once that happens, then you can start engaging in a discussion about, well, does the slave trade come under international commerce? And if it does, what do we mean by that? Let's talk about it. So the conversations on slavery clearly take place in August because that was the time to talk about it. So if you pay attention, in other words, to these committee assignments, particularly in August and September, a lot is revealed. All right, that's 6. Number 7. The one that has the greatest impact on scholars is the Constitutional Convention as a 4-act drama. This is what I've created in order to emphasize what I've been getting at in terms of the idea of Madison's Republic, Madison's notes, the idea of a debate taking place, and actually a drama. And if you scroll down, you can see Act 1 is the alternative plans. And you can, at any particular time, you can go in there. Let's just say scene 4. Just click on that. See, that gave you the thing on Madison. So if you click on scene 4, in the box itself, yeah. June the 6th, click on that box. Then it shows you what happened on that day. And the context for this wonderful Sherman-Madison exchange, which is, for political theorists, that is the day of days. I mean, historians, political theorists have their favorite day at the convention. For Max Ferrand, it's July the 16th because that's the Connecticut Compromise. For other people, it's August the 6th because that's the first draft of the convention. I place a lot of emphasis on June the 11th because that's when Sherman, in fact, introduced the Connecticut Compromise, and it took him over a month to get around to it. And that is a critical day for me. The end of June is critical because all of a sudden there was a major theoretical breakthrough when it's discovered that we could be partly national and partly federal. Up till that time, we were either national or federal. And the breakthrough didn't occur. So that's a favorite day for me. But for theorists on the whole, this is the favorite day. This is a small republic versus a large republic day. But what's the context of the small republic, large republic argument? The answer is Resolution 4A. Well, what is that? That's the resolution dealing with should popular representation take place in the House. And then you stop and think, what the heck does a discussion of popular representation in the House got to do with this dramatic issue between Montesquieu and Locke and a big tradition and path-breaking Madisonianism? It's not the first time, nor the last time in American discourse where some big issue starts off in a concrete circumstance. And that becomes a lesson that you can learn. That it took from 1763, hey King, lay off. to 1776, hey, all kings are bad, off, you know, cut you off. I mean, that's a big shift from in 13 years. Well, this is an American phenomenon. From small seed, big acorns grow, or whatever. But here's the core of that debate. Are people happier and freer in small republics or large republics, and why? Bam. And that shapes the rest of the discussion. Okay. So if you keep scrolling down, you can see Convention is a 4-act drama. Wait, all right. So scroll down, Act 1, Act 2, right? And then I have intermission. Now, Lloyd, you're really going too far now. When you have an intermission, people go and stand up, have a drink, and come back, and you're over-dramatizing this thing to get people's attention. No, in fact, for a week, people went away. They had a break. They created a committee, and they sat down and they came back. So in effect, Act 1 and Act 2 is the discourse stage of the convention. And then we get to Act 3, the Committee of Detailed Report, and they're responding to that. Therefore, slavery occurs in here. Act 4, the end is in sight. And that's where you get the Brearley Committee, ungenerously also known as the Leftovers Committee. And this is where the Electoral College was done because they could never get the presidency settled. And so Act 3 and Act 4 again are action periods, and Act 1 and Act 2 are discussion periods. And hopefully looking upon it as a 4-act drama is another way of getting into Madison's notes. All right, well, we're right there now to, it seems to me, on the verge of Madison's notes. And what I've done, I've worked on this for 25 years and it's now done. If you scroll down, you can see the attendance record. I've put together a day-by-day attendance record. This is, I mean, I don't even know that it's accurate. No, that's not true. But if you want to say, if you want to enter the attendance record, you go there, and you can go Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, and if you use this scroll bar there with the just come across, that gives you per day. Scene 3, so resolution 1, as I mentioned, and why don't you go to June the 6th? This is a favorite day, all right. And then you click on June the 6th. Click on June the 6th. But it tells you who's in it, and you come across, it tells you who's in attendance from all the states on that particular day, and what happened on that particular day. And that has on a day-by-day basis. You say, well, why is that important? Well, one thing that's important is that somebody has said, well, look, if this discussion on slavery was important, why didn't Hamilton open his mouth? Excuse me, discussion on slavery, Hamilton wasn't there. Big discussion these days over war powers. Hamilton and Madison in the 1790s talking about war powers. The one thing we have from Hamilton is his June 18th speech. Well, what about that August, where they dropped to make war and put in to declare war? What did Hamilton say? The answer was he wasn't there. So at least it helps you avoid traps and pitfalls of a certain kind of interpretation. The other interesting thing is discovered is that in August, the Virginia delegation, 2 people had left. Wythe and McClurg had left and gone home. That left Blair and Madison, who voted together, and on the other hand, Randolph and Mason, who were now voting together, but on the opposite side. And Washington then had to come off his perch and become a Virginian and cast a number of votes, usually on the side of Madison and Blair. And that raises the whole question of, well, what was Washington's role at the convention? The attendance record can help you to figure that out. By the way, if you want, I'm not saying this is that you do want it, but if you did want it, okay, scroll back, yeah, and then go back to how to get into the convention. I mean, how to get into this. Yeah, we have to go back one more. If you want to do it on Excel files, it's also an Excel file. Open it. Does it do it? If it doesn't do it, we'll move on. You can't do it?
It's down.
It's down. Right, there you go. You can follow each person on their day by day, all the way through, and see whether they were there on a particular day or not. And sometimes a person has been there for 2 weeks, and they're introducing a topic that's already been settled 2 weeks, 1 week ago. You think, where the heck were they? The answer is they weren't there. Either that or they weren't listening, right? But they weren't there. So sometimes that can help. Well, I have overextended because let me end on this note. And that is, go back to the home page. There's a lot more like selected correspondence, entertainment of Washington at the City Tavern. You should see the menu. I invite you to see the menu. Doesn't anybody eat anymore? The amount of drinking going on was incredible. If there's any period in American history, if the founders came back where they would not recognize, it would be the Prohibition era. Because it's the water in Philadelphia back there that encouraged that. By the way, the records indicate that the 30,000 Philadelphians, what they drank in the morning was beer for breakfast, and that the founders had a light beer for breakfast. But that's another story, right? I'm going to stop there. I could take you into the ratification, the Federalist, Anti-Federalist, but let me just say it. What I would encourage you to do there is that I'd have the essential Federalist and the essential Anti-Federalist. And of the essential Federalist, I mean, among all the other documents, is, say, take Federalist number 10. There are 23 paragraphs in Federalist 10, and what I've done is to provide a paragraph-by-paragraph breakdown of all 23 paragraphs. And then with the essential Anti-Federalists, the same thing. And then highlighting the most important ratification conventions and a day-by-day account. And instead of having the Christie painting, I have a map which shows red states, blue states, Anti-Federalist, Federalist. And instead of the 4-act drama, we have the 6 stages of ratification. And one of the things that emerges very interestingly when you start mapping the Federalist, Anti-Federalist out-of-doors discussion with the ratification conventions indoors discussion is that there is an overlap. And in particular, there's an overlap if you notice that textualists have a hard, well, they can see the Federalist Papers 1 through 15, 1 through 14, 15 through 22, 23 through 36, that makes sense. 51 through 84 makes sense. 85 is wrapping up the last 2 issues. But I can't figure out 37 through 51. What do I do with it? What do I do with it? Well, the answer is it's all written by Madison. And what does it deal with? The great difficulty of founding. And what was the issue? And when were they written? They were written in January/February. And almost to the day beginning and the day ending, that's when the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention met. And what was the issue of the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention? What did the founders do? Were they demigods? What were they doing? What such and such? And I think it is more than coincidence that if we might call it, the critical ratification indoors debate was Massachusetts. And for me, the critical Federalist Papers are 37 through 51. And they address precisely a key issue in the whole, the great difficulty of founding. And the great difficulty of founding is how to create a more perfect union rather than how to create no union at all or a perfect one. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gordon. Questions? Comments? Controversy? Yeah, Mark.
Maybe some of each. Well, a comment, I think this is an incredible tool that you have put together. One thing that I'm wondering is whether you have thought about or maybe done something about having a text of the Constitution itself that you can sort of click on a sentence or a phrase, and it'll give you, the dates on which that's discussed or something like that.
I've thought about it. That'll take me another 25 years.
Oh yeah, that's
No,
what
no, I have thought about it, but partly the part of my reason for not doing it is that I want people to get into Madison's
Right.
notes. And what I didn't show you, if you just turn it down quickly, this gives me the opportunity without belaboring it. The ultimate task of the project is to get to Madison's notes. So scroll down, and you will see, go up. Notes of debates in the first federal convention. If you click on that, you'll see, what you'll see is there they are. And you just click the date you want. And then if you, I mean, it won't be difficult to accomplish, it won't be 25 years. But what you could do is if you go into that date, and then, all right, if you go into that date, say June the 6th, right? And then on the side, you will see summary of this day. So if you go there, bam, what proposition came up on that particular day? Link that to the issue that you're thinking about in terms of the Constitution. But in a certain sense, you can't talk about what thing in the Constitution until you get to August the 6th when you get the draft. Because up till that time, everything is provisional. So I mean, you'd have to write an introduction saying, I'm only taking this up from August the 6th on.
Yes.
Oh, and thank you so much. I feel like you probably know each individual one of these people intimately.
There's still a gap. I don't know what Madison was doing at 2 o'clock on the 18th. That bothers me.
Oh, and thank you. I would like to ask you, this was so successful. This Constitution, the convention was so successful. It's lasted to today, even though we still fight over different aspects of it. I would like, and then you said it was teamwork that caused it to be. Is that the main reason? Why did it survive until today? Of course, it's being questioned today. But why did it survive until today? And we only had a few million people in the United States at that time. These were 39 men. We have so many more people and so many more legislators. So what are our prospects for the future? And hopefully they've laid the foundation.
Well, fortunately, we only have 10 minutes.
Oh, I'm
No,
sorry. Thank you.
Those are profound questions. Each one of which could become a lecture in itself. But let me, a very brief answer is that there are certain moments, whether it's by design or not, or it just happen unfolding. There are certain moments in which the right people are at the right time, the right place. That's what Van Doren called a miracle in Philadelphia. Madison himself alludes to the fact of what kind of virtue it took in order to create this. And a number of people. One of the reasons why Madison decided it was so important to get this thing ratified, even though it lacked perfection, because the alternative that was being proposed was another convention. That is, go around to the various states, gather their opinions, and let's come back again. And Madison was aware of how difficult it is to duplicate what happened. And I would hope that narrative of, I mean, Tocqueville, I think, captured it in one way. No other country in the history of the world prior to America had been told that their government doesn't work, everything came to a halt, they deliberated for 4 months, and then went out and deliberated further in the press and in elected officials, and they adopted it, and not a drop of blood was spilled. I mean, that, it seems to me, is the American contribution. Sometimes it has been eclipsed, and it's going to be a controversy because it's a more perfect, not a perfect. It's not a utopia. Why has it lasted so long? I think because people have wanted it to last so long. Why is it under attack? Because there's a certain aversion, a certain understanding that a constitution, like other literary or fundamental canons, are historical pieces. That is, their relevance is derived only from the time and place in which they were written. How can possibly a document written by people in 1787 with 3 million people have any relevance whatsoever for a 21st century with 300 million people? It's about time that we got over that mystical attachment to the Constitution. But I mean, besides that, there is more than a mystical attachment. There is an actual product which was the result of the deliberate sense of the community, to use a Madisonian phrase. It's about, if we want to get back to civil discourse, what we need to do is to get back to the founding as an exercise in deliberate sense of the community. Civil discourse, in my mind, is a sort of a nice way of saying we want cooperation. And Madison's idea is that it's through competition of ideas, competition between the branches, competition of federalism, that kind of competition that leads to some kind of reasonable outcome, other things being equal. So it's through that approach. And the civil discourse just doesn't happen. But I would drop civil discourse and look at deliberate sense of the community. As long as we keep that alive, it'll stay.
Thank you.
I had a question about just comparing, not like Mark, really this is amazing, this whole project. I was wondering about what you talked about, how the founding was kind of very providential. You didn't use that word, but very fortuitous, the way that they all came together in these circumstances. And I was wondering if there was something more stable or more proper to that time that kind of could explain their success in part, and that is the quality of public life at that time, and whether or not, well, both the quality of discourse or public discourse and the level of education and virtue of people in public life, whether or not they were important contributory factors compared with today.
Yeah. Could you go back to the biography which has names, dates, people, events, occurrences? That biography is right. If you go down and you see where it says the continental experience of the framers. Well, I wanted to stay away from the providential.
Okay.
I wanted to say that there are. I wanted to keep the potentiality of providential alive without simply saying it was providential, right? But there are certain circumstances which conjure up some remarkable event taking place, right? Look at where do we go here? These people signed the Declaration who are at the convention. Continental Congress experience, take a look at them all the way down, all right? And if you keep it state, all right, yeah. Well, all of these people had experience creating state constitutions between 1776 and 1780. They had a sense of the public. They had an understanding of what political life required. And they were young and experienced, which is a lethal combination. And they knew each other, and they had been to school together, and they understood these things. That doesn't mean to say they didn't disagree. There are disagreements, manyfold, at the convention. So that's what I meant. That I would like to move us away from the idea of civil discourse, which implies disagreeing is not a good thing, to a deliberate sense of the community, which requires initial disagreement in order to arrive at some deliberate sense. That, indeed, they had. And I think they had it through the 1780s, and they understood that they could learn from lessons, but they understood how rare that was to duplicate. That's not something that you want to rely on occurring every 10 years.
Yeah. I guess what I was sort of gesturing towards was maybe that they had a sense of responsibility for the common good that maybe is not quite so common now. I could be idealizing too much, and I'm wondering, is that just an idealization? That's kind of what it was.
No, I don't think it's too much of an idealization, as long as we remember that by saying public, I think one of the disservices that progressive historians, and then some, over the last 100 years have done for us, is to reduce all action to economic action, and all economic action to self-serving economic action. And they have taken out the whole possibility of some sense of doing good for others. I'd hate to be their children, to believe that the whole job of a parent, that is to serve themselves and not their children. Right? and that somehow any mention of public virtue or any mention of doing good for others is automatically seen as a cover-up of self-serving and sort of window dressing. I think that I think life is a combination between serving others and serving yourself, and somehow that's part of human nature. I mean, if all men were angels, no government would be necessary. And I would add to Madison's 51st letter, yeah, but if all men were beasts, free government wouldn't be possible. So it's somewhere.
He says at the end of Federalist 55.
Exactly. So it's, I mean, at one level, you read 10 and 51 and say, this guy says we're beasts, and then you read 55, and this guy says we're angels. Which is the right Madison? Well, the answer is you're not reading closely enough. You're not start understanding that human nature has these two sides to it, and that that's the paradox of life. That how do we deal with that? And one of the things the progressives have done is to remove the paradox by saying all the public stuff is simply window dressing. And I'm saying, while I don't want to go the other way and say everything is somehow providential, I want to restore the notion that the two are possible and harmonious.
Before I take the next question, because I'm looking at a number of students who spent 7 weeks studying the Constitutional Convention, and I'm going to insist that there's at least one question from one of you.
Whoa.
Yeah.
I had a particular question. Hamilton gives his long speech, and shortly thereafter he leaves, and I believe also the rest of the New York delegation. And then later he comes back and he comments, and I think he takes part in the committee, but as far as I know, he doesn't vote. But clearly he was highly opinionated about the whole matter. Why didn't he take advantage of it as a fellow delegate?
If you were to take, if you go back to the attendance record, please. Come down. Yeah, come down to. How do you go down there? Quorum requirements. Each state imposed an internal quorum requirement, and so if you take a look, all of it. New York required 2 out of its 3 delegates to be present before New York could cast a vote. Right when Hamilton left, Lansing and Yates were still there, and they kept casting votes until they left on July the 10th. After that, when Hamilton returned, he could be present and he was vocal and he was listened to and he was heard, but he couldn't vote, which is one of the ironies, but he signed at the end. But it was not an official New York state. So each one, and this is when you put the quorum requirements next to the attendance record, a whole, what do I want to say, a whole new understanding or appreciation starts to emerge. And New Jersey, for example, if you take a look at New Jersey, 3 out of 5 had to be there. And William Churchill Houston left early because of ill health. So that meant that 3 out of 4 had to be there. And what was going on in New Jersey, since it was just across the river, it was that you had a shuttle service. And Madison would leave, and the other one, and somebody else would replace it. But the shuttle service didn't always work on time. And so you had these little gaps. You begin, why isn't New Jersey voting today? Such and such and such. Why isn't that happening? And so if you follow the quorum requirements, one of the ironies of the convention is that it was there to remedy the articles, and yet they decided to adopt the voting requirements of the articles, 1 state, 1 vote. Under the articles, each state could have anywhere from 1 or 2 delegates up to 7, and they would argue among themselves how to cast 1. And that's the rule that they followed, except in the case of Pennsylvania, which did 7, and then they selected Ben Franklin as number 8 at the end as a, whatever reason, as an honor or as a self-serving, because Franklin's name recognition, probably a bit of both, but the honor of Franklin's president. So if you follow the quorum requirements, I mean, there again, that's not something that comes to mind as edifying or as electrifying, but the quorum requirements are extremely important, and it tells you a lot about Virginia. If you look at Virginia again, you got McClurg who left, who was a doctor, and his wife says, "Come back home, you're really needed. Don't get quit administering to Madison." George Wythe left because his wife was ill. So that left Washington, Randolph, Madison, and Blair, and Mason. And then in August, you got a 2-2 split. And once you understand the quorum requirements for voting, and you understand that, then all of a sudden the role of Washington emerges. He didn't have to say, he just, well, you see Virginia voting. And then Madison's notes become a lot clearer. Madison, in fact, tells you from time to time who voted. Good guys, bad guys, right? He tells you that. And what you figure out, then you get really into it with the quorum. So the answer is the quorum requirement.
You made a big point about how, in particular, the Christie's painting here was the blinds were open, and there was a big deal down in the first 3 days of the convention about secrecy and rules. And it kind of doesn't necessarily mesh with our concept of government today, where we want open and transparent government and being able to weigh in on it. Do you think that the fact that, in spite of the fact that all these founders had really unique biographies that led to their experiences at the convention, do you think that a greater sense of, I don't want to say secrecy, but as you said, something to sort of push our Congress today to work more towards the, as you said, the community and the needs of the community versus this really open debating in the press and really pandering to public opinion. Do you think that would have a big impact on more economy in our college?
Can I get one footnote on that? When they introduced cameras into the Pennsylvania legislature, there were certain people who spoke all the time and at great length, who had never spoken much at all before.
Well, I think it goes back to your point about, do we have the same kind of civic spirit? Or, I mean, I would even settle for attachment to the institution rather than attachment to party. I mean, that's a step in the right direction to say, well, I'm standing up for the Senate, or I'm standing up instead of just saying that it's a party. Secrecy goes on in Washington today, and that's probably one of the ways that things get done. I think, personally, transparency is overdone as a way of getting results. It's that you've almost got to go into committee. Politics loves the darkness. And you come out into the light once you finish. It's when you come out and you still keep it dark is the problem. So I don't think that transparency is going to answer this question. I would love to see these members of Congress, first of all, read the Constitution. And then second of all, try to get educated about what it is that they're representing. And that goes for both parties.
Yeah, but,
I did know it, yes. In terms of the convention, for yourself, what did you find, perhaps, apart from maybe the slavery issue, most disappointing about the convention? You can comment on something, but other than that, what would be your biggest disappointment about the convention?
Council revision, Gordon?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, that would be up there. The Council of Revision. Yeah, but I can certainly see why Madison. But I think the greatest disappointment is not so much an issue, but rather the extent to which it shows the fragility of the deliberative process, that in certain crucial moments, people play, I've had enough, I'm walking out. And although only Lansing and Yates officially walked out, which creates a huge problem for me because they were winning at the time. And why they walked out when they were winning has always been a real question. And why were they winning? Because they were voting. They would have voted for the Connecticut Compromise. To vote against the Connecticut Compromise on July the 16th would have been to vote along with Madison and the Nationalists. So they would have voted. Is that why they left? You know, early. But apart from that, even elevated people like Wilson would say, you know, this is too much. I'm not going to sign. Or Randolph, I'd rather chop off my hand. Such and such. So there's a certain disappointment. I mean, if I could just laugh at it and say this is histrionics, you know, this is really the American mind at work. Go to the brink. I mean, or be hucksters or threaten.
Gun in Bedford.
Gun in Bedford. I will go with a Florida. Sir, that's an egregious statement. I am outraged. Withdraw it. That kind of, if I could just keep my humor, it's fine. But that is the number one disappointment. For example, on slavery, which I will address, the more I read about it, the less disappointed I am. And I need to be careful what I'm saying about that. It's because what was the choice? In a sense, what the Committee of Detail report came in with, which is the South Carolina delegation, pushed that through, was that Congress would never, ever have any control over the slave trade whatsoever, anytime in the future, period. And probably that would enter into the amendment process, that it would never be happening. And what happened is they came back with 1800. I prefer 1800, 1808 over never, if you're talking practical.
As a prerogative of being host and ask the last question, if you don't mind. There's a debate today about the constitutionality of the health care law. And there are a number of states and attorney generals questioning this, and others saying that that's nonsense and so on. Who cares about the constitutionality? This is just history, isn't it? I mean, it's wonderfully fascinating history, but those people are dead and gone. Why should it matter?
This is related to your question.
Yes, thank you.
Why does it matter? It seems to me that it matters because institutions matter, roots matter, heritage matters, the way in which things are done. That I would disagree with Hamilton, that it's virtually only the end that matters, it's not the means. That the way, and one of the contributions, legacies of the anti-federalists, it seems to me, and Madison, is that liberty is lost or won in the means of doing things. And so it does matter how we do things, if we still think that the potentiality of liberty is alive, or that we wish to preserve liberty. Liberty is preserved in paying attention. I wouldn't go so far as to say, listen, we're going to kill you, but the scaffold better be according to codes. I'm not going to go that far, right? But I am going to say that that the way in which we do things matters. So if we are attached to a way of doing things and a certain sort of constitutional morality, we ought to be able to address that issue. So it still matters if liberty matters. And America is a wonderful country. I mean, you have pointed out many a time in terms of your scholarship on Madison that Madison is remarkably consistent throughout his life. And part of that remarkable constituency is that he puts his faith in the deliberate sense of the community. And the idea that there's a way about going, and that I think is part of his disagreement with Hamilton. Hamilton doesn't fuss with forms. It's Madison who fusses about party, national party, for which he's got a bad rap, by the way, if he can't make up his mind. Is it scratching his left hand with left ear with his right hand? Is he doing this? Watch it, you missed it. But he's doing this all the time. You missed what he's doing. Or as Martin Dime would call it sweet talk. Calhoun would call it loose talk. I think he was fussing with the idea of it. But who defined republicanism in the Federalists? It was Madison. Who cared more about good government? It was Hamilton. Who cared? So my answer to you is that the constitutionalism matters as long as liberty matters, as long as institutions matter, as long as doing things, the way in which we do things matters.
Please join me in thanking Dr. Lloyd.
Warm hand of applause. Well done. That's not an easy job.
Remember that to exit, you have to exit that way because of the